Okay, so welcome back to the KodaCast. It's been a while since we've recorded anything. Life kind of happens, and that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes. So we're continuing right where we left off. And it's been a crazy couple days in terms of getting the set, because the room here we designed has always had the purpose of becoming a studio. This was my first attempt at trying to build a sound insulated room that we can do stuff like this in. So it's really nice to kind of see it come into fruition, and I have a lot of people to thank for that. Eber, Tiffany, the team. It's been a fun week for sure. But what makes it more fun is that it's a super hot week and we're sweating up in here. So if you guys see extra perspiration coming from our faces, it's hot in here, right? So if we start getting a little heated as the conversation goes, it's just because the room's getting hotter, right? But the KodaCast is meant to be a way for us to kind of document our journey with Kodawari Collective, and to kind of share the stories of the people we meet along the way, the people that we end up doing collaborations with, as well as build cars, do meets, that kind of stuff, right? So I'm here with the Hashiriya Ladies. Tiffany and Emma, and welcome to Kodawari, Emma, and welcome to the KodaCast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm pretty excited for this.
Yeah, we've gone through quite a few adjustments in terms of getting this show on the road, so why don't we just jump right into it? Emma, how did you get into cars, and tell us a little bit about your story.
So for me, not really anyone in my family is involved with anything automotive. So it was really more of an outside influence. Sorry. It was definitely more of an outside influence for me. Growing up, my grandma would go to Toronto all the time and would take the GO train. And she would pick me up these die-cast cars, which definitely, I would say, introduced me into cars and showed me, I guess, the options that were out there, but nobody really in my family had been interested in cars whatsoever. But essentially, I kind of had different inserts of automotive culture in my life. So growing up, my next door neighbor, he would always be building cars. I'm like totally blanking. I'm sorry. I'm having like a total moment of like.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's hot in here. You can take a deep breath. It's been you drove here with no AC, correct?
Yes, no AC at all.
Yeah, but don't worry. It's a beautiful Toronto summer night, and with the windows.
Gorgeous 40-degree day.
Yeah.
Sticky and.
But we're also not in winter, so at Kodawari we try to practice gratitude, regardless of the fact that it probably feels like 40 degrees in this room, especially. So you were talking about your neighbor, and he was building Hondas, and that was a little bit of exposure into his world as well, right?
Yeah. So growing up, I saw him building Hondas all the time. Every month, there'd probably be at least 1 to 2 different ones being built in his driveway with his friends. And all of his friends had different cars. The only other car I really remember from his friend group was a Miata, just because that guy still has that Miata and still drives it to this day, which is kind of crazy. But him and his friends would always go to what's called the Downs, and they used to race their cars, and they would take me along sometimes to kind of see what was going on, and that would have been probably my first introduction into anything to do with racing.
Yeah, and from that racing, how long did it take for you to eventually, get into creating this community?
So for me, I really did not get into anything automotive until I dated someone who was really into cars. Just because I didn't really have anyone in my friend group or literally anyone in my family who could introduce me into anything involving automotive. And I was also very timid and very anxious. So I didn't want to just throw myself in there and kind of get rejected, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I met this person, and he was really big into Subarus, which then kind of influenced me into purchasing my first car, which was a Subaru Forester. And then from there, I got really involved with automotive photography, and then really involved with the Subaru community.
Yeah. So the journey started with your grandma buying die casts for you, and then your neighbor with the Hondas, right? Do you remember what size die cast, and do you remember why she specifically brought home cars for you? Was that something you requested, or was that something that she just noticed and started doing?
So that's something she just started doing. It was honestly, like thinking to it, it was very out of character for her as well because my family is a very academic and sports driven family. So for my grandma to be buying die cast cars was very out of the picture for her. But they were varying sizes from the 1/16th size.
164 is like the Hot Wheel size.
Yep.
Yeah. Did your parents ever question that? Where they're like, "Hey, why aren't you buying her like sports equipment? Why are you bringing home like die casts and stuff like that?"
No, and that's the funny thing is like my mom bought me Barbies. My mom, I think, was more in love with my Barbies than I was. Truthfully, she cared way more about them than I did, and my grandma just kept buying them, and I just loved them so much more than anything. And I just had this collection of die cast cars. It was really random, and like thinking about it now, it doesn't really make sense at all to what motivated her to do something like that. And she just kept doing it. Even when I got older, we had probably 13 kids and grandkids. And I was one of the older ones, but my grandma would buy pretty much all the guys the same gift and all the girls the same gift. And she would even always be buying me Hot Wheels or more die-cast cars where all the other girls would be getting clothing and all of these other things. So I don't know if she just knew and just saw it, but yeah.
You should ask her one day.
I wish I could.
Oh, she's no longer with us.
Yeah, so she passed away in 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for your loss.
Yeah, before I even ever got my driver's license, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because to kind of hear the story of how like sometimes life just, positions these things, where your grandma buys these cars. I don't know. Sometimes maybe she's just noticing things that maybe now not many people are kind of paying attention, because you mentioned how your mom bought you Barbies and she was more interested in that, and that's a very human thing to do, because a lot of parents they get stuff for their kids that they wish they had as a kid, right? And sometimes all it takes is to actually, instead of being so kind of fixated on what you wish you had as a kid and trying to give it to your kid, but being more present about, oh, who is this kid growing up to be? What are their interests? How can I actually be present and maybe go pick up a diecast and bring it back, right? So that's cool. In terms of your neighbor, do you remember any specific Hondas?
Oh, he had so he had an EG hatch for the longest time.
Okay.
And I still remember it because it was the really pretty, like, turquoisey.
Oh, that's Joa's favorite color. Oh man.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I still remember that. And it just kind of over the time, he'd kind of switch between different Civic hatches, kind of a variety. I think it was mainly EK. Right? Is that early 2000s?
Yeah, EK would be 99 and into the early 2000s.
Okay, yeah, so exactly. He'd have a lot of that body style. And then I remember a couple years later, he finally got a GTR. It was an R34, so it was like the most exciting thing ever, especially on our street, because a lot of kids on our street were into cars because of him, because he'd always be bringing these cars home. And yeah, and then he eventually got his dream car, and now he kind of just...
Does he still have it?
Yeah.
Oh, man. And do you guys still live in the same street?
No, he now lives out by Cuga. We grew up in Burlington, but now he's out by Cuga. That's pretty much...
Cool. So Hondas with the neighbor, got to experience that, eventually got into photography and the Subarus through your relationships. Yeah. And then eventually, through some more time, eventually where you are now, right? So why don't we jump over to you, Tiffany? Sure. Why don't you share a little bit about your journey and where that started?
Okay. Wow. I did have a little bit of influence when I was younger. My brother and my dad were always like super into cars, specifically JDM cars for some reason. My dad had... When I was younger, like I can remember, like we lived in Staten Island for a bit of time, and I remember like for the longest time he just had like so many Mark III Supras, and I remember there was one, I used to call it the American car because it was white. I think it was white or it was red, and then it had like a white panel and then like a blue door or something like that. So I was like, it's the American car, But I loved the cars, like with the Targa top and whatever. Like they were just so so fun when I was younger and stuff like that, but I knew nothing about them. And then when we moved back to Canada, because I was originally born here, but we moved down there just for a couple of years. And then when I moved back, my brother started driving. He had one of my dad's Mark III Supras, eventually moved on to having like a 300 ZX. And then like once he moved out and got his own house, he had like Hondas and Subarus and everything. He's had so many cars. And but he was always more mechanically inclined, and so I learned a lot more from him than my dad. But
so sorry to interrupt. Were your brother and dad, were they always like, hey Tiffany, come out to the garage and see what we're doing? Or were you kind of just like,
not at all,
you would always just gravitate
not
towards
at all
it?
Like my dad, I think more so owned the cars just for the enjoyability of them, like just for driving them, and because he just enjoyed them. Like he never really worked on them. Like I don't remember a time where like he was on like one of those, you know, sliders under the car to work on it or something. Like I've seen him change a radio and stuff, and he can do most stuff, but like he's not the type, you know. My brother, however, like I have a photo of him on my phone of him in the engine bay of an EG hatchback, and it's captioned he's an engine now. But no, it wasn't like ever like a come look at this or anything like that. It was like, I mean, when I was younger, like I remember my brother like taking me for a drive in his 300 ZX, and I think he had just gotten it tuned, so it was like 400 plus horsepower or something. And I remember him being like, all right, if you can touch the dash, I'll give you like $10. And I couldn't. I was like, whoa. Yeah. So but yeah, it wasn't like anything ever like that. Like I was just interested in it, but I didn't start really kind of wanting to learn about cars and about the community until 2016. I went down to Tennessee with him. So in Tennessee, which most people would know about, there's a road called Tail the Dragon, which is used to be the North Carolina-Tennessee state line. It's 311 turns in 11 miles or something like that. It's crazy. It's like literally just turn after turn for 20 minutes straight on the side of a mountain. And so they go down there. They have every single year, like there's tons of events that happen down there, but the one that we went down for was called Foresters at Deals Gap, I think. And so they had like a meet with maybe like I want to say like 50 to 100 cars there at Fontana Dam, which is just like down the road from where Tail of the Dragon begins. And all these people would meet up, and then they'd go and drive the dragon for a couple hours, have some fun, and then they go out for dinner as like a big group. And then kind of you're just there for the rest of the week, like doing your own thing and whatnot. But it resonated with me a lot because everybody was just so friendly. Like they were all welcoming. It was like they were happy to see each other, even though like they're from, you know, I think we were the furthest people that coming from Ontario. Going down to Tennessee was like a 14-hour drive, but there was people coming from like closer to California or like from Florida or for like.
And they were mostly from the States?
Everyone was from the States.
Okay.
We were the only group that came down from Canada that year, I remember. There was about 10 of us who went down, and it was just like mainly my brother and his friends. His one friend has been going down to Tennessee like since he was a kid, like with his family. So I think that's how he got involved, because he was like on a forester forum or like a group or something, and then he was like, I'm gonna go to this event, like I go down to Tennessee all the time anyways. And so it was him that planned it, and kudos to him, he had like the best route planned out. Like he gave everybody like a sheet printed off with like here's the coordinates, here's our first stop, here's our second. Like it was like really like a well-planned trip. But going down and just seeing, you know, the energy that everybody had and just how friendly they were to each other, even though they didn't know each other, they're from all different parts of the country, like just because of a make of car, like I was inspired by it a lot. Like, and for me, it's always been the community, because after that, I got my Subaru. I bought an STI hatchback with never having any sort of like car like that before. Like my car prior was a Saturn Iron, and my first car was an SC400, but it was my dad's. It was automatic. It was like I knew nothing about it. But jumping into owning a manual STI hatchback with a turbo that's 300 horsepower, like I knew nothing about it. I didn't know how it worked, what it was.
Did
nothing.
You see that car at the event?
Yeah.
It did, and is that why it stood out to you?
Yeah.
And
like I saw it at the event, and then like I saw them, you notice a car and you're like, oh, that's nice. And then you start seeing it everywhere. It was like that. So I started seeing them here, not like WRXs or STI hatchbacks. And I was like, wow, like I really like those, but I knew nothing about them. And I just jumped into having one. And for me, it was always just like the people. So I ended up moving on to, you know, hosting my own events or co-hosting events under like larger groups in Ontario. And then that's brought me to, being an events planner now. So
Yeah, because that's interesting to kind of see the progression of that, because not a lot of people would come out to an event like Tail of the Dragon with that community and then jump right into hosting events, right? So what do you attribute that to?
Honestly, like the one thing, like it's people. Honestly, like the Subaru community and like Subaru specifically, like everybody's so friendly. Like the Subaru wave, like everybody. I don't know anybody that waves at me, but like there's so many people that wave at me throughout the day, and I'm just like, they're just so happy to see each other. You know what I mean?
And they're always Subarus? Yeah.
Subarus always wave at each other.
Yeah.
Like the same thing with like Jeeps do, or like motorcycles. Like you don't need to know them; they'll just be like,
yeah.
And
you know what's funny is because like I noticed that with my friends who drive Subarus as well. They would always say the same thing, and I don't know why. Growing up driving Hondas, we don't wave to each other.
They're really competitive.
Yeah, they're very competitive.
Honda kids are like super competitive. So that's the thing. Like it depends on the community. I think going to a Subaru event where everybody acted like they were friends who hadn't seen each other in a long time, it was like, whoa, I want to be a part of like a group like this. Like I want to have people who are, that friendly and that welcoming and just lively in my life. You know what I mean?
And then you wanted to create that back home.
It wasn't even like yes, like that's where I'm at now. But it was never the intention to be like, I want to get into planning it. It was just like, I started going to meets in Burlington that happened every Tuesday night, that were like held under it was like under an umbrella, like a larger group. And I just became friends with them there. And then I was like, hey, we should do something other. Like there was one guy who kind of organized stuff like, and would be like, let's drive together to like a Cars and Coffee or something. And I just started being like, guys, like, let's make a day out of it. Let's go to, this farm up in Brampton. It's called Downey's Farm. Like, let's go up there for the day. They have like their pumpkin, like Halloween festival kind of thing. Like we'll all cruise there together, and then we can go like hang out for the day, like do whatever, grab some food and come back. Or like another time we went up in the morning and we went to Cars and Coffee. Or another time like we used to meet every time like in a Tim Hortons Plaza that had like a breakfast place, and we actually reached out to the breakfast place and got like a group discount for like all of us coming in one morning like early on a Sunday. So it was like just like I want to plan fun things for my friends. And then it turned into, we had the pandemic and there was a lot of like disconnect from the people around us, and it used to be such a big lively community, and then people kind of like became a bit recluse, started being online a lot more. And I was like, okay, I want my community back and I want to bring people back out. And I had moved cities at this point. I was living in Mississauga, and I was like, I don't know anybody around the area that has Subarus or has like modified cars. Like I don't have any like local buddies, So I was like, I'm just going to put it out there on Instagram and see, who I can get the word out. And it started from that last year. And then another like larger group called Six Subies, like the owner of it, reached out to me, and like I'm friends with her. I've known her for some years, and she was like, hey, do you want to host it under us, and like we'll let you plan them and whatever, but like at least it gets us some exposure and gets our meets back up, because they had stopped doing them like pre-pandemic and they hadn't got back into it. So it became much larger, and like I got to know a lot of people through it. And then I was like, I really do enjoy like having that kind of like almost like extracurricular in my life, like other than just, the 9-to-5 job. And then, yeah, I continued into winter, just doing like ski and snowboard meets and stuff like that. And yeah, here we are today. So actually working it as a extra stuff, extra jobs and whatnot. So it's like slowly becoming my career and moving me away from the other things I work on.
Yeah. 'Cause like, just hearing your story, it reminds me a lot about myself, because like to me it seems like you're that person in your circle of friends that likes to plan things, likes to kind of get everyone together,
the
right?
Mom of the group.
And I was kind of similar in a sort of like, yeah, in terms of growing up, I was, people and relationships were always very important to me. My mom taught me the importance of creating a space in terms of for family jams or like just get-togethers, to creating the right environment. And all through high school, I threw like massive barbecues for my friends. We got like way too drunk, but it was always like the best food, the best drinks at no expense because we just wanted people to have a good time. And we wanted to kind of do it our way, right? So it's kind of blossomed into the events that we do now, and it's interesting to see because, you know, to some people that seems like a lot of work, but to certain people it's not. It doesn't seem like work.
Yeah,
you kind of just do it.
It's really not. Like I always, like when I was younger, like in high school or like in college, like I would always like plan like New Year's parties or like a birthday party or something. Like even now, like I plan my girlfriend's birthday parties. Like I've done like 2 or 3 of them this year, and I've just been like, don't worry about it. I've got your birthday sorted. And booked them dinner. Booked, you know, we went to a shisha lounge. We went out to the bar after. Like the rides were looked after. Everybody was invited. Like everybody was told like what she wants for her birthday, like without her knowing, you know, like, and like I just love doing that stuff for people, or just doing it just for fun, like for everybody or for a specific person, doesn't matter. But it's always just been like, I've just always been that kind of like social butterfly, I guess.
Yeah, because, you know, that's really cool because like Kodawari is all about, like when we look at our team, we look at positioning people. I always like remind myself, like put a circle into like a circle peg into like a circle hole, right? And it's like, how do you help people identify who they are in terms of doing things? And I always ask the guys, I'm like, or people that we meet or come into the team, is like, what do you do that for other people seems like work, but for you the time flies for you and you get that enjoyment, right? And I think if, you know, a lot of more people kind of work on that self-growth where you understand that side of yourself and kind of build a life around that, you know, a lot of beauty can kind of stem from that. Not only do you kind of become the best version of yourself working towards your strengths, but you also are doing something that's, you know, brings you a lot of meaning and happiness. Why don't you guys talk about how you guys met?
Okay, so well, we both, ironically enough, we both grew up in the same town. And we grew up very close to each other. Like I actually went to middle school and high school with her cousin. So when we first actually ended up meeting, which we met online, like through the Subaru community, we met on Instagram. When I first met, I was like, oh, she has the same last name. And then I was like, wait a minute, do you know so-and-so? And then she was like, yeah, that's my cousin. I was like, oh, wow, okay. So we didn't meet for most of our, you know, adolescent lives, even though we were like kind of around each other the whole time. But it ended up just being cars and social media that we connected through. And then when she started up Hashiriya Ladies, like I had always done a lot of volunteering, and I was like, hey, do you need a volunteer for your registration desk? And she was like, yes, I do. So
All the help.
Here we are.
So why did you start Hashiriya Ladies, Emma? Like what led to that decision?
Thank you very much. So for me, I have a Toyota Cressida that's a 1UZ swapped, and I purchased.
So where's the 1UZ from?
Lexus LS400.
LS400.
Yeah. So it's the V8 from those cars.
Okay, so that was swapped into your Cressida, which is a smaller car, much smaller, lighter.
It's kind of somewhat comparable. It's a smaller version of an LS400 for sure.
Yeah.
But it's heavier than your Supra, I'd say. Anything. It's a boat. It's a 4-door.
What's the displacement on that motor?
It's a V8. It's a. I know I can like literally see it right now, and I can't actually think of it.
Can you hear it? Because there's something.
I can hear below too, and I was like, oh, this kind of sounds like the V8 too. It's like a little.
Yeah, sorry guys. There's we insulated this room as much as we can, but sometimes the cars, because we're right above the shop space in Kodawari, so you may occasionally hear a V8 or.
Bit of a cam
going.
We're still kind of in business hours.
Yeah, we are. Okay, so Cressida swapped with the V8.
Yes, with the 1UZ. I purchased it swapped. I did not do the original swap. I am fixing everything the original owner did because they did it very hack is the best way to put it. It's kind of a sketchy car. My rad hose was being held to the rad support with house electrical wire, and just kind of little things like that. But with that, so for a really long time, I'd always wanted to drive and actually participate in a lot of these drifting events. All my experience had been driving other people's cars, so I didn't actually have any seat time in my car.
So what was your first exposure to the drift scene?
I went to a Drift Jam event. And
Is that local or is that where's that held?
so Drift Jam was held between Brecken Go-Karts, and they'd have some events at TMP Cayuga. They are unfortunately not hosting any events this year. I don't know if they'll continue on, but that was my first exposure, was at Gamebridge Go-Karts, and it was October. It was rainy as all heck. It was miserable, and I just had experienced the Drift Jam community, which was a lot of more, I would say, more done up cars versus what you see some people in drifting have hoopties essentially. So Drift Jam kind of set like a standard for a lot of the cars in Ontario. So my first real exposure was to all of these gorgeous looking cars. Like one of my friends was driving a JZX 100 and like just kind of these crazy JDM cars that you don't really see on the street. And then from there, I kind of was like, oh, I want to get into this. And then I purchased my Cressida. But I finally got to drive my Cressida a couple years ago, and I did my first event in it, and I had a blast. I did one of Shannonville's open days. And their open days, essentially anyone can go drive the skid pad or the track at Shannonville. And I did skid pad all day. It was great. The Cressida had its issues. Still working on some of those. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to keep driving. And then I went to work on the Monday, and I tripped and fell at work, and my foot got stuck in a bundle of rebar, and my body went the other way, and the doctors thought I tore everything in my knee, so I wasn't going to be driving for the rest of the season.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So I was like on top of the world, finally got to drive. I was so happy, and then like literally the day after the event just all came crumbling down. I was like, well, this is awful. Like and I'm a pretty active person. Most of my time is spent outside, hiking, camping, or doing anything automotive. And I was like heartbroken because I was like, what am I going to do? I'm just going to sit on a couch they didn't know if it was going to be a year, depending on what had actually been torn in my leg or what had gone on. So this was still COVID time. So I'd say probably like 2021, 2020-ish. And I just sat on the couch for a bit, and I was like, okay. And I went to a drift event. I went to one of Top Drift's event, which Top Drift's been running drift events in Ontario for, I want to say since like 2012 or something like that. So they've been around a long time. All their events were at Shannonville until more recently. But there was a girl there, and she was driving, and she got kicked off track. And I listened to her. She came up to me, and she's like, do you know why I got kicked off track? Because I knew some of the people like had been around the community a lot longer than she had. And she's like, I don't understand what happened. And so I got my friend to go talk to the person who kicked her off track. And it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there are no women competing or even participating in Ontario drifting. And this one girl who actually came out and actually is trying gets kicked off, and it's okay to just belittle her, not give her any support or actually understanding of what she's doing wrong. And that kind of set emotion in me, and I was like, okay, that needs to change, because like that's not how we help grow this community. That's not how we build this community. That's just pushing people out of it.
So they never gave her an explanation?
No, I had to get one of my buddies to go ask her, and
what did they say?
Go ask the person who kicked her off. And he didn't really have a valid reason. He's like, she keeps going off, and that's it. And then we kind of looked at him. We're like, there's all these people going off. Why are you
going off during like drifting event?
Yeah.
Okay.
So which Top Drift events, not to be rude to Top Drift, are a little bit more of a free, you kind of just give her. It's not like monitored. It's not as heavily organized as a lot of the other events are in Ontario. So like there's no driver cap, anything like that. There's no...
When you say driver cap, what does that mean?
So usually for a drift event, you want to cap the amount of drivers, because if you don't, your drivers have no drive time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you want to give people enough time on the track to actually,
Yeah, and make it their money's worth, right?
Yes,
It's a lot of money. It's an expensive hobby. Some of these people are driving from Quebec to come drift in Ontario. So you want to make sure everyone has kind of the most optimal experience. And that's kind of what I was noticing, is just nobody was creating this inclusive environment for women to come out. And it was almost frustrating, because the year before I had been to an event in Alberta, and it was the most life-changing experience because of the community they had built. And the community was all about supporting each other. And they actually had 3 girls drifting that skid pad event. And I'd never seen that many girls at one event in my life. And I was like, if they can get 3 girls locally without doing something special, I'm sure we can get that many girls out. And we had 40 women come out last year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was it an only all women's event, or was it just open to everyone?
It was open to everyone. So there's a club in Alberta called Rocky Mountain Drift Club, and it's a giant skid pad, and it is an old World War II training base camp for pilots. So right next to them is a whole airport, which they now actually use some of the strips to go drifting. But they host an event every year called Drift Camp, and it's like the most amazing event because they actually have the townspeople come out to support this community event. And yeah, it just kind of changed my perspective on what drifting could be and what the community could be, because it's something I noticed even in our Ontario community is we're lacking that sense of community and supporting each other. It's everyone has their own groups and cliques and stuff.
Yeah, no, you're right. I definitely see that a lot too.
Yeah.
You know, like the GTA and our city, it's so vast. There's so many different communities, and it seems like it's with time things are kind of separating into, like, even when you go to like the local meet and stuff like that, right? It's always like these little cliques and stuff like that of people. No one's really interacting with one another. And even when I've spoken to people who have come to our open houses and stuff like that, they're like, oh, is it kind of like that kind of vibe, or is it different, right? So yeah, that makes sense, right? But what I wanted to come back to was like, okay, so you fell in love with drifting and this whole community, and then you had a very serious injury, and you were kind of at an inflection point, right? So where was the gap between the recovery and coming out to that event and being like, wow, there's not enough women here, I want to change that?
I had hurt my leg the day after Thanksgiving weekend, so October 12th-ish time period. And there was supposed to be one more event of the year, and I was so excited to drive it. And then I think it was only 2 weekends away, so I'd already hurt my leg. So I went to the drift event because I wanted to do photography or something, just be a part of that environment.
You were able to walk still?
Oh no, I forced my friend to take me and pick me up and drive me out.
Was there ever a point where the doctors like, this could be a very serious injury where like you wouldn't walk again kind of deal?
Not walk again. It was more so they were worried that I tore everything in my knee. So my ACL, MCL, meniscus. So when you tear your ACL, it's a lot more of a serious injury. Typically, it's a full surgery. You're actually only allowed typically they say allowed, but you're only really within reason to tear your ACL twice, or it becomes very detrimental to anything you want to do really with your life, because it's your main ligament in your knee. So for me, I was lucky. I did a partial tear of my MCL and a full tear of my meniscus, so it wasn't as bad as it could be. I didn't really need to go for the actual surgery. I'm still recommended to go for the surgery because my meniscus was torn, but it's something that you can work through to a point. Of course, when I get older, I will need to do surgery to reattach and reassemble, or however that works, and then go from there. So.
Yeah, so the injury you were able to be back on your feet not too long after, and then you were
so I was actually off walking from October until about February. I didn't start walking until February because I had to wait for an MRI. COVID had backlogged everything, and even though I did get hurt at work, they couldn't bump my MRI up anymore. So I didn't actually go to get my knee looked at like properly with proper imaging until end of December. And then finally they made the decision that I could walk again in February, and then walking from crutches to cane to like just learning how to walk again. And I think that was also kind of the hard part about that, was learning to walk again, because you don't realize how not walking for so long, it really throws it off and what it does to your whole body, because one leg's taking all the weight and all of the stress and letting your other one just kind of chill.
Yeah, so like did the injury have anything to do with kind of that reflection point where you were like, there's not enough women in the scene, I want to change that?
Yeah, so the only reason why I would say that I had such a huge influence was because I wasn't driving and I was at that event and seeing that girl kind of get
okay. So you were spectating. Yeah.
And just seeing her get pushed to the side and kind of just disrespected like that, I was like, that's not okay. We're all equals here. We all want to be on the track. We all want to drift. We all want to be an experienced driver. But we need to have respect for each other and understand that we all need to learn somewhere. And creating that safe space and that inclusive environment was what motivated me, because I realized that there was no safe space for women to come out and actually participate.
And that was how Hashiriya Ladies was born.
Yep.
So what does Hashiriya mean?
It means street racer in Japanese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And when did Tiffany come into the picture?
Tiffany came into the picture. So I had announced my events and I was looking for help, and she just reached out to me and said, do you need help for your first event, which was my April 23rd event, which was awesome.
I had volunteered for like a number of years at like a local church doing their it was a church that was like listed under Salvation Army, and so every winter I used to run the registration desk for what was called their Santa Shuffle. It was like a 1K and 5K marathon, and it was just a one-day event, but it was something that like it happened always on the first Saturday of December, and it like kicked off like the Christmas season for me. And it was like something like I just loved so much, but then COVID came around and they stopped doing it, obviously. And then they didn't start it back up. Like it was like the end of 2021 and things were kind of like mostly back to normal, and they hadn't started it. And I was like, like I want to do something. So I think I was like yearning for it a little bit. And then I saw the post for Hashiriya Ladies come up, and I was like, oh, and then I don't know. I don't remember if you wrote, they think that you wrote that you needed volunteers, but not for something specific. And then I asked if you needed help with like registration desk. And I was like, I've done this for the past like 8 years. Like, this is something I'm really good at. I've done these things, whatever. Like, I love doing that kind of stuff. And then she was like, absolutely, I need your help. Like,
yes, please.
Yeah. And I think I was the first person that like reached out for volunteering, wasn't I?
Yeah. You were pretty much like one of the first people actually really helped with.
I've kind of just been along for the whole ride. And like, I mean, a little bit of like last year and like this year, I've kind of like taken a step back if I needed to or something like that. And just like hopped back in when I had more time and whatnot. But it's, I've definitely like, I feel like I've been there for a good portion of it. And yeah, slowly just became number 2 looking after everything when Emma's way too stressed to be doing it.
Yeah, so how long has it been since the inception of?
This is our 2nd year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what have you guys done so far? Like what is your direction in terms of what you're looking to build?
Yeah. So last year we only hosted 4 skid pad events, mainly focusing on drifting, just because that's where a lot of my passion lies, is with drifting. So I started with those 4 events. We had about 40 women come out last year over the 4 events, which is quite a large number of females wanting to participate in just drifting alone, which made me realize that there is a lot of missed opportunity for women to be able to participate in things. So this year we moved into track events, and we also moved into Alberta. So this year we actually have 4 events in Alberta, 3 skid pad and 1 track event. And then we have 2 track events in Ontario and then 3 skid pad events.
Okay, so you guys are hosting just like a lot of events.
Plus our show and shine coming
up
up
on the
23rd.
Yep. And then, so the plan is, so my first event this year, my April 22nd event, we started growing into road course and lapping, just because road course is actually a great fundamental skill for drivers, especially if you're looking to go into drifting, anything like that. It's a really good way to learn how to address what your line is, your driving line, and how to approach, and actually building up the confidence to approach corners with speed. So I figured it would be a very, just a sensible thing to add in that aspect, because it is something that a lot of people don't have experience in. And it can make the difference between a driver, because it helps you in so many aspects with just understanding your car as well. So from there, we're expanding into show and shine, and then hopefully drag racing next year.
Yeah. It's eventually like we're hoping to get into like a bunch of different aspects of motorsports and kind of create like a network of, different locations, having it in different provinces and stuff like that, and just give a lot more women like a more opportunity to get into this stuff, like feel better, just having an interest in cars, knowing that there's other people out there and that, they can express that side. So,
and feeling safe and not feeling like they're going to be judged or like made fun of, because that's actually one of the most common things I actually hear from these girls is, I would never have done this because I didn't want to get judged. I didn't want to get feel insecure. I didn't want to feel like everyone was watching me, and providing that space enables a lot of these girls to build that confidence to actually go participate with everyone. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, because just hearing from both your stories and and getting a sense of how these gatherings have made an impact on you. Now you're kind of shifting that into like, okay, how can we create that for our community? All these women who are maybe a little bit, like I don't know what it's like to kind of go into an industry or a sport that is dominated by the opposing sex, right? And what comes with that in terms of the good and the bad, right? So it's nice to see that, you guys are creating that and not only doing it locally, but moving it across provinces, and then also branching into different types of motorsports. So the drifting is one, the road course, the show and shine is going to be the first one. Or you've done the show and shine before?
We did the show and shine for our April 22nd event, but our April 22nd event, we got about 40 millimeters of rain in one day. So it wasn't the best turnout, but we did have girls come out, which was awesome. So I'm excited to do one with really nice weather, and it'll be in the middle of the summer versus the spring.
And it's nice. Good having it, like, a lot of the tracks are, like, they're far from the city, right? So, like, having an event where we can host it in the city, like, in the GTA, I think we're going to have a lot of girls come out that necessarily wouldn't make it out to the track or feel comfortable going that far or something if they've never been to a motorsports place, and so I think it should be a good turnout having it in a urban area as well.
It'll be exciting.
So in terms of, like, have you guys been to a lot of show and shines?
Yes.
Oh my god.
Right?
That's like the main kind of thing. And like
I literally built
Ontario.
a Forester. That was like my first car, and it was like a little I had a Forester. It was an SG, so it was an 05, and I lowered it on BBS RS reps, and it had like a color shift wrap, and that was like my show and shine car. I was so proud of that thing.
Given all of your experience in the show and shine, and there's so many different ways to go about this, right? What are you guys looking to take in terms of making it uniquely for your brand, right, for your community, right? In terms of, I don't know. Yeah. What are you guys thinking?
So the goal is, the idea behind this is to create that community, because we all have communities, everyone has communities, and there's a lacking of a female community in motorsports to support one another. And there's trickles of it here and there's trickles of it there, kind of here and there, but it's not consistent. And I would say the goal, especially with the show and shines, is creating the ability for these girls to meet each other and to communicate, to have like the ability to build relationships and not be intimidated by like, oh, she has 60,000 followers, she's never going to give me the time of day or something like that. Because I can assume, like, I know even from my own perspective when I was a photographer, it's so intimidating trying to approach people and open up the conversation at times. And I want to create that environment where the girls all feel like they can collaborate together and, like, create their own little teams, communities, whatever it is, like, just help establish that.
Have a family, all that kind of stuff, I think, and having a panel, like, we're going to have a panel of women speaking who are, in the automotive industry or motorsports or anything kind of related. And I think that's a good source of inspiration for, even younger girls who are getting into this stuff, and to know that there is a place for them to have that in their life as a serious career, more than just a side hobby or something like that, and that they can get really, really involved with it, and there's a place for them potentially in it,
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Because when you go out to the meets, when you go out to the show and shines, it doesn't always have to be so competitive. It can be, a collaboration, right? Like, you get inspired by other builds. You're asking, oh, how did you do that? Oh, that's very interesting, and it gets the creative juices going. And especially when you form relationships and you build that friendship, it just adds on that, right? So that's what I hope, we can do with the show and shine, because again, from the things that we've talked about, the word community keeps coming back up, and I ask my team, and I ask, anyone that we do collaborations with, why are we doing that? And to me, Kodawari exists because I was like, you know what, I would love it if someone who loved cars, all of their friends no one liked cars, and they wanted to find that community. They wanted to find that sense, that place where they can go and be inspired or to just discover things they had no idea existed, right? I would love for the show and shine to be that, right? Where a little girl can come out and be like, hey, you know what? I have no idea what drifting is, but if I can come here and maybe talk to someone who's been in motorsports, listen in on a panel, right? See some cool cars, meet some cool people. And sometimes that's all it takes. That's all it takes to kind of really change someone's life in a very meaningful way.
100%. And it's interesting that you say that, because that's something I've even noticed with the women's events since I started them. The amount of women who feel like it's okay to actually come out and spectate these drift events. Like, you used to go to drift events in Ontario and it'd be all dudes. Like, you'd see everyone with their girlfriends and stuff. And now you're actually starting to see girls come out on their own or with their girlfriends and stuff. And that's why I wanted Hashiriya Ladies as well, is because, like, I know my friends outside of motorsports, they do not want anything to do with cars. They think it's the most insane thing ever, and they don't understand it. And finding those people, it's hard sometimes. It's scary. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes a lot of times you just have to just be open-minded enough to come out and see. A lot of times, even when we see people at the events or when we're meeting stuff, when it's like a couple, you know, a lot of the women they don't even introduce themselves and this and that. And it's like, we make such an effort to be like, hey, welcome to Kodawari. Like, it's not just for the guy, it's also like, let us show you what we're about. Let us show you this whole world that we've built and why we love it. And maybe you like it, maybe you won't, right? But it's got to be like, you got to give them that same respect. And just being as inclusive as possible. Yeah. So we are planning on doing a show and shine together. And Tiffany, I know you just had a trip out to Poland, and you went to go see a really cool event called Alt Race. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience there, and maybe that can lead into what we hope to bring into what we do at our show. Oh my
gosh. Well, that's a far ways away from what we have in Canada, but it was a huge inspiration. Alt Race is a massive modified car show that happens every single year in Poland. I'm not sure too much the history on it, how long it's been going on. I only learned about it, I want to say 4 years ago, like 2019. It used to be called racism. Which is being from North America, that's a horrible way to call it, but I think they found it funny. But it was renamed to Alt Race, and I think it is actually Europe's largest modified car show. So I'm not kidding you when I say that it's a 2-day long event. They hold it at the sports stadium in Wrocław I probably butchered how I said that. They hold it in the sports stadium there. It's a city on more of the western side of Poland. I would say it's still a couple hours from the border, but western side, like closer to Germany. And I'm not kidding when I say I walked around for 5 hours and I did not see the whole show the first day. They had a drift circuit going all day with, I guess, guys who drift. I'm not sure in competing professionally or anything like that, but like it wasn't open for everybody. Like, there was a select group of cars that were going all day, and it was like a show for people to watch. On top of that, having hundreds of cars and stuff that you don't see here, obviously, because, you know, there's brands that exist in Europe that don't exist here, or that very, very rarely get imported in, you know, Skoda and Citroen and all that kind of stuff. So seeing all those, or even just seeing stuff like, you know, we have our Volvos and BMWs and Mercedes and stuff like that, but they have different ones over there that you just don't see as often. But it was amazing to see, and the build qualities over there, like, they really were like on a pursuit to find the nicest stuff in Europe. And people were coming from so many different countries, which, I mean, you have an advantage in Europe because the countries are small and it's easy to, you know, bring your car from, you know, France or something like that, because, you know, it's like for us driving across Canada, you know, it would potentially be a longer time. But tons of really, really cool stuff there. There was still, I mean, obviously, with such a large show, people being there for 2 days and leaving their cars, like, they're not always by their cars. So sometimes there's a disconnect of like, okay, I know an okay amount about cars, but I'm not going to look at an engine bay and know exactly everything that's done to it because sometimes I don't know what it looks like to begin with. So having like, like a list of things that's done to the car or something like that, or a little plaque about it, like it was on some of them, but not all of them. So sometimes it was like, wow, that's really pretty. The hood's open and I don't know what is going on here or something like that. Or sometimes it was like, oh, like that's definitely not stock and I see what's, going on here. But, huge event. They had panels. They had a mass amount of vendors. They had
who was part of the panel? Like, what were they talking about?
Oh, I'm actually not sure. I missed some of it. I want to say that they had some like large like following YouTubers out there. They had there was one group who I actually was fortunate enough to meet. I was walking around the Saturday or the Sunday of the show was actually my birthday. So it was a little bit of a birthday treat to myself that I got to go out to this amazing car show and be in this city in Poland by myself and whatever. And I saw these guys shooting a video with a skyline on one of these this old beautiful bridge like over a river. And I was like, wow, like what is going on? So I'm like sitting there watching it, whatever. And then they're doing their thing for like the longest time. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go across the road and just like, excuse me, do you speak English? Like in Polish to them, probably so badly, but they were like, yeah, we speak English. And I was like, oh, like, what's your, can I grab your Instagram or like the car or something like that? And they're like, yeah, we're this and this. And they're called Car Vertical. And they essentially just do stories about owners and their vehicles and do these beautiful videos. Like I was watching some of their stuff online. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And they had a huge booth at the show that they had a couple really nice, like one old Porsche there, another really old Mercedes there, which had a lot of like, I want to say like inspiration from like the Evo 2. Like the Evo 2 Mercedes, but it wasn't one. But yeah, stuff like that. Like, but I didn't see who was on the panel. I want to say it was like larger YouTubers or like people who, had like large companies. Oh my God, who was the one guy that I saw there?
Wasn't Night Ride one of the panelists?
Night Ride was there. I'm sure they spoke on the panel because they're a huge
and I know they drove.
YouTuber.
I saw them drifting because I think they were part of the drift circuit this year as well.
Probably. They had that like van. Have you seen that van with the motorcycle inside of it?
Yeah, I watched a lot of after movies of Old Race. And I saw them, the crew that made that van with the motorcycle inside because they won Best of Show.
I think
probably
last year too. They've been really successful.
But they had their own booth and they were selling a lot of their merch and stuff like that. But it seemed really, really cool in terms of
and I want to say, oh my God, who was the guy that I saw? I want to say the guy who created RWB was there.
Nakai?
You said Liberty.
No, Liberty Walk.
It was Liberty Walk. That's what it was.
You told me about that.
It was Liberty Walk. And,
it was the
and
R34
honest to God,
that they brought.
because I had walked around the show like a fair bit. I was there for most of the day, both days. And I kept seeing this man walking around and he just had this nicest smile on his face. And I was like, and he looked me in the eyes and smiled at me. I was like, wow, he seems like a very nice man. And I just kept walking. And then I realized when I saw him in a photo, I was like, oh my God, that was the owner of Liberty Walk that just smiled directly at me from like 4 feet away. And I was like, I wish I knew that because he was doing like photos with people and like, chatting with them and stuff. And that would have been such a cool experience to just talk to him. But I mean, he looked me in the eyes and smiled at me. It's enough.
It's just one of those moments where you're like, I should just take photos of him. He might not be famous, but I'll get a photo with him.
So like from what you've said, you go up to these cars that are so nice, right, and the owners aren't necessarily around the cars, but you want to learn more about the cars,
or they're around the car but they don't speak English, or I don't know what language they're speaking, especially in Europe, right?
If you were to like, how would you improve that interaction, right? Would you like to have seen a list of mods in the car? Would you like to have seen a link of their socials that you can later on go on and be like, oh, so like this is their social, maybe I can say hi on this? Or would you like to see maybe any videos that have been put out that narratively talks about their story, right? Like those are just a couple examples, right? But
like, I mean, a combination of it all. I want to say like my favorite things to see at a car show, for one, is like having some sort of a plaque in front of the car or like something on the dash that tells you a little bit about it or something like that. But a nicer thing actually, and something that they did at Motorama, which is kind of more of like the older car crew. It's a lot of classics. It's a lot of, you know, older dads and stuff like that have these cars. There was a group that was at Motorama this year, and I was blown away at it, but they had a table set up with a photo album, and you were able to just flip through the photo album and see pictures of it, like as the cars were built, you know, back in the day, had like some stuff written, and it was essentially just like a scrapbook. And I think there's such a different feeling to have something like tangible in your hands, to be like, wow, look at how much work has been put into these cars. Like, this is somebody's like passion project. They've owned it for years. Like, now I feel like I know a bit about the person. I feel like I know a bit about the car, the struggles that they've been through, you know, like, you know, the styles and essentially the different lives that this vehicle has lived and the different stories it's been through and stuff like that. So it's about conveying the message, because, you know, everybody that you talk to, if you talk to them about, you know, their car or anything in life, like, there's so much that you don't see that they know behind the scenes, right? Like, there's more than just face value. So, but I mean, in terms of giving somebody an idea who's going to a show and shine, like, a photo album is fantastic, but a build sheet, having, you know, I feel like it would be super cool to see. Do you remember those like photo frames, like the electronic photo frames that people used to get, and they would like flip through? Imagine like somebody having one of those on their dash or something, and it's like going through like little videos or whatever, or like something like that would be neat too. You know what I mean? Stuff like that.
You almost need like everyone to get like a little QR code, and you can scan the QR code, and it builds up, like, brings up their whole build sheet, and you can see all the photos from the
That would be really cool.
Now I just got a whole new idea.
There you go.
But
cut that out of the podcast. Nobody can have that idea.
Copyright.
You're hitting on a very important thing, which is that in a day and age where all you see are highlight reels, all you see are these cars being shown off and displayed to perfection. We get fixated too much on the final product. Yeah. And we find a lot more connection as human beings through seeing the struggle. Yeah. Through seeing, like, this has been a 20-year build.
It's about the story.
You know, it's about the story, and it's been like, this has been through my kids and this and that, and look at the car, and this is persistence, and I've been through so much failure and upset and this and that. And I think that's something that we all go through. So when you see that in a build, it allows for you to connect even at a deeper level.
Yeah, and that makes me think of, like, I went to Driven earlier this year in early June before I left for Poland. I went to Driven, and for the most part, I walked around the show, and I was like, okay, there's some cool cars here. There's a lot of people I know here because I see them out. They're locals, whatever. And went down to the lower level of the show, and in the back corner, there was a bunch of Mazda MX-3s. And I didn't know what it was. I was like, what is this? Is this like a Miata? Like, I was like, I've never seen one before. So I was like, what is this car? And my friend and I that were there, we just decided to walk up to the guys that were sitting behind them, and we were like, hey, like, sorry, are these your cars? And the one guy was like, oh yeah, like, this one's mine. And we were like, what is this? He's like, oh, it's a Mazda MX-3, you know, that. And we got into a conversation with him, and he's owned the car since the 90s, and he was showing us photos of it, you know, back in the day with like these flame decals and like the girls posing in front of it with like just like this super like 90s early 2000s attire. And he's like telling us like everything that he's been through with the car. He's like, it didn't run for a couple of years. Like, I've built it from the ground up. I built the engine. I, you know, learned how to weld. I made my own roll cage. I 3D printed parts for the engine, like, because you can't find parts for the car. And we had like a 45-minute talk with him, and I was like, listen, I was like, and I told him, I was like, I want you to come out to Kodawari, which I'm hoping that he's going to be able to get the day off to come here next Wednesday when we have our open house, so that you can chat with him, because his story, actually, it made the entire day of me being at Driven. Like, it was, I told him, I was like, you know what? I was like, this is what's important in the car community. This was missing, because we have such a disconnect between, like, there's all these people who just want to post, like, cool videos and photos, and that's fun and that's great, and it's nice to have something cinematic or, like, visually appealing to see, but to speak with somebody for 45 minutes and hear about them owning this car for the last 23 years plus, and everything that they've done and all the skills that they learned. And mind you, he doesn't work in automotive at all. He learned how to build an engine. He learned how to weld. He did everything, body work, everything on the car himself, you know, and just took his time with it and really learned it. And, it's like I had a pipe bender screwed to my garage floor, like learning to bend the pipe. And he's like, and you make one wrong bend and like there's $100 down the drain because now you're wasting this big piece of pipe and I have to cut it off and I have to try it again. And I told him, I was like, you know what? I was like, you've made my day. Like hearing your story, hearing about everything that you've been through, I was like, this is the kind of stuff that I want people to hear. You're the kind of person that I want to pull out of the community more and put like more in the spotlight and be like, look, there's people here who really have something to share that's like, that gives you some emotion, you know?
Yeah. And it's cool that you bring that up because that's what I've always felt was like a missing part of these shows, right? Like the cars and the cool brands and the parts are like the drifting, it's all cool, but like it's really the storytelling. It's really that connection that I find very valuable, and not everyone does. That's just what I care about, and just because someone looks at a car like that and they're like, oh, it's just a car, but this is actually that person's own personal journey of growth. This is them trying a lot of new shit, failing, having to acquire new skills, invest money, sacrifice things. And it's like, you look at something like what we've built at Kodawari, this is kind of my kind of attempt at building something. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be this big for it to get recognition. Sometimes it can just be a car. Sometimes it could be even smaller than that, right? But actually, highlighting that. And it's funny because we've talked about at the open houses, I've talked with some content creators of like, selecting specific cars, bringing them into the shop, and actually doing a live podcast or a conversation right there highlighting that, right?
Especially the Hoonigan SEMA videos, because every single one of them will choose their favorite build out of the show, and then they'll meet the owner, and they'll talk to the owner about the car, about everything about the car. And I think it was 2018, 2019 SEMA show. I forget whose favorite car it was, but it was an old wagon, and it was this older lady, probably in her later 50s. And she had built this whole wagon on her garage floor with her husband and went into the whole detail and just elaborated on all of the trials and things she went through, because I can't remember what the vehicle was for the life of me. But she even talked about custom building certain parts for it and just the trials and just issues she went through just trying to experience this and figure it out, because her husband was always in racing, so she wanted to be involved with it. So I definitely see the disconnect, but I think some people and certain like content creators have that idea like you where they need to actually interview that person, and I think a lot of people are starting to explore that now versus like 5-10 years ago you wouldn't really see that at all. So it's definitely coming forward. I think it needs to be promoted more rather than having all these hot boy clout videos and all that stuff.
Yeah, there just needs to be a healthy balance of that. And it's again, you talk about nowadays what gets attention, the stuff that kind of pisses people off, and all the negativity gets a lot of headlines. Yes. Right. And so when you look at the car scene, it's like, oh yeah, you're gonna see takeovers, or you're gonna see people street racing and like running over people, or just lighting stuff on fire, whatever it is, right? But how can we be the change that we're looking to see? How can we highlight the stories of the beautiful things that we see in the scene, in people building their cars, so that that's what gets the crazy amount of views versus like another video that is going in the opposite direction. So
I definitely see that as well. One of my experiences that I had this year was I worked with a group called Right Track Racing, and they are actual police officers who go to high schools to go speak to students about street racing and dangers of it and things like that, which I'm sure if you think about when you were in high school, you probably thought a cop telling you to not street race was the biggest idiot ever. Like, it's true. You just look at this guy and you're like, no. But the really cool thing about the Right Track Racing team is they are actually building a drag car, and they invite these high school students to come out to a special showcase day where they can come to Cayuga to see them show their drag car. And they've started working with high schools actually who have like very strong shop classes, and some of these shop classes are building drag cars or building time attack cars and things like that. And I think it's a matter of the older generation coming forth, and I think a big issue in the car community is gatekeeping. I don't know what happened, I don't know what changed it, but it seems like there's this switch that happened in the earlier like 2012 to 2014 period where we stopped using forums, we stopped sharing our information on builds, and we just started keeping it all internal. And I think that's also something that's prevented us from having those people interviewing people and being like, hey, like, I want to learn about your car. Like, I can think of a gentleman in Ontario. He has a 70 Celica that is 3UZ swapped, which insane build, insane car, very unique, everything. And I had tried to approach him multiple times to be like, can I take photos of your car? Can I do this with your car? Like anything like that. And I would never get a response. But my guy friends in the community who are photographers would get responses all the time. And I think it comes down to, again, it's an ego thing, and it's taking that ego out of the situation and taking that gatekeeping and everything out of the situation, because we all start somewhere. And I think that's something that everyone needs to remember, is we all start somewhere. So to let those kids that like think your car's cool, let them sit in the passenger seat, let them be a part of what you were doing, and let them feel like they can be a part of it as well. Because even I can say from different events I've attended, if I don't feel welcome at that event, I'm never going back to that event. So.
And that circles back around to your neighbor.
Yeah, like, and him including me as a kid, like, he didn't have to include some 9-year-old in building his cars or going to the runs. Like, there was no need for that. He just saw that I was interested in something and helped me pursue that passion at that point in my life.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me a lot about what a story I've shared with our audience before, is that, yeah, when we were growing up in our early teens and getting into our early 20s, we met a group of guys that were running a tire shop called Tires 23, and we were just getting into our licenses and driving, and they not only employed us, but they also shared the car culture with us. They took us to track events. They taught me that now you need to save up money and buy quality parts that will last you, and that will help you practice patience, that will help you practice discipline in terms of not just gravitating to like doing it quickly, but understanding that these things take time. And even to this day, Billy's still a very close friend of mine, and he's seen what we're building with Kodawari, and I've given him props many times. Like, Billy, Kodawari would not have existed without you. And he's like, why? Like, I didn't do anything. And I'm like, no, like, you could have easily just told us to fuck off, right? You could have easily just been like, I don't have time for this, bunch of kids, this and that. But no, you let us into your doors, and you let me ride in your cars on the track and stuff like that. And that means a lot, because now when we go out to events, we're the only booth that lets people sit inside our cars. Like, we've made so many memorable experiences with people through that. And, you know, like, so much of what, like, going to those events as a business, we're like, okay, you know what, like, what's our return on investment? Like, we got to look at the numbers and this and that. And it's hard to find that balance, right? But seeing, like, I understand that we're trying to make decisions for the long haul, but we've had so many amazing memories of people like, holy, I've never sat in a sex. Like, my dad loves it so much. Like, we're sitting there talking to him about it. Sometimes we've even let them start up the car and stuff like that. And, you know, we want to continue to build that, right? So I hope we can take some of this into the show and shine. I hope that we can really try to make an impact and define success in our own way. And hopefully that success means that the videographers, the creatives in this space, the owners in the cars attending, the stories we tell, the awards we give, which also kind of brings something up to the top of my mind, because I was talking to somebody, my buddy Vince from Outrun Night Racers, and he was talking to me about the awards and this and that, and I was like, you know, there needs to be some innovation with the awards, you know, like it reminds me about a story of how there was, I can't remember if it was a specific state or if it was a specific country, but like, instead of ticketing people for the bad shit in terms of speeding and all that kind of stuff, they were actively, positively reinforcing the good stuff. And it made a way bigger impact in the grand scheme of things, right? So I want to think about the shows and what we do and how we could possibly innovate and encourage the sense of community, the sense of sharing, the sense of that, right? In the community, right? So yeah, we'll definitely have the awards for what you guys have, wanted to give out. But I think what we could do, whether it's a Kodawari award or whether it's a joint award, we could come up with whatever. But you guys, what I'm trying to say, right? Is like, how do we encourage the behavior that we want to see in the community?
Miss Congeniality Award. Sorry, that's literally what I thought about was Miss Congeniality.
So I know the movie. What does Miss Congeniality mean again?
So Congeniality, the idea is like the girl who's like the most supportive and like kind of there for everyone and like kind of blending everyone together.
So the person who is arranging all the car meets and cruises, who's that person? We give her an award, right? That's it. But that's it.
Yeah.
Right? Even exactly. Like I'm very passionate about my kids and how to raise them to be good human beings, and I really have a strong curiosity for behavior and how I can understand more about myself. And from the little bit that I've read, reinforcing the positive stuff is more effective than scolding and highlighting the negative stuff. So I hope we can kind of reflect upon that and maybe bring a little bit of that, maybe bring a little bit of the things that you were talking about, Tiffany, in terms of sharing that story, sharing that journey, talking about that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then hopefully we can leave everyone with a very positive, lasting impression, right? Because again, it's comes back down to something I always talk and share with the guys is like, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully through this podcast, we've been able to talk a little bit about our why and why we're doing this. I also want to add that we will be re-releasing the flyer clarifying that the $35 is not for everyone in terms of like just to see the show. It's free to come out and see. The $35 is just for the cars entering, correct?
Yes. So some clarification on our show and shine. For the women who are entering the show and shine, it's a $35 admission fee, and then anybody can come and spectate it. So bring your kids, bring your wife, bring your friends, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever.
Dogs.
Dogs.
Cats. Maybe even a cat.
I mean, if somebody brings a cat and there's a bunch of dogs here, that might be bad. But I mean, I'd love to see somebody bring their cat on a leash to a car show. I would be just.
What about a cat in a sitting in a drift car, remote controlled?
Yes. Someone did that at the auto show with a bulldog, and it was the greatest thing ever. They were literally, this little bulldog was in one of those like little kids cars, but they had
that's amazing.
paired it up to the RC.
I would forget all of my duties as the event planner and just be like, "There's a cat in a remote controlled car."
Okay, so if you're if you're listening and you're bringing a cat in a drift remote control car, stay away from Tiffany until the end of the show. Reward her at the end of the show for her hard work.
Nobody say anything.
When we come out and we give her awards for putting together all the stuff, then you can come on and drift around. All right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So the event is July 23rd from 11 to 3. And yes, anyone is welcome to come. It's just for entering the competition, $35 and women only. So
if you are a guy and you are planning to come, all we ask is that you are the biggest cheerleader and the biggest hype man there is. And just support the ladies and just make more want to come out and enjoy the automotive community.
Yeah. 100%.
So like the planning is still ongoing, so we'll be releasing details as we go in terms of where to park. Most likely we'll be directing parking into the GO station. As we will be allocating most of our property to the show and shine.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there going to be food? Is there going to be vendors?
There's going to be vendors working on food, possibly.
Yeah, I would love to see like a couple different, like at least food trucks or something like that come out. It's just all the details are still being ironed out at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Cool. So we'll continue to release information, and then why don't you guys touch on what does the future look like for Hashiriya Ladies?
Well, I'll let Emma start off on this.
There's a lot going on with Hashiriya Ladies, especially up and coming over the next little bit. In the coming years, I really want to grow Hashiriya Ladies across Canada as a whole. I would love to see us in every single province, helping women participate in all avenues and aspects of motorsports, whether it be actually participating in racing, whether it be pit crew for different racers, different things like that.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of, as a whole, we're really hoping just to expand and just create more space for women and just make it a bigger space, because right now we don't take up enough space in motorsports, I'd say.
And there's plenty of space out there.
Oh, heck yeah.
Right? Yeah, this is going to be exciting. Hopefully, if you're in the area, if you're not in the area, if you have anyone in your life that is remotely interested in automotive, you should invite them out. But especially if you have women in your lives that have any curiosity, and maybe if they don't, just bring them out, just so maybe they can discover something that they had no idea. Because I think a lot of the times, just seeing and trying new shit, who knows what you're gonna get into.
Exactly. You don't know what'll stick.
Yeah.
Honestly, please bring your families, bring your kids, bring your friends who have no interest. Like, just come out, and if you don't like it, you don't. But if you do, you do, and you don't know unless you come and see.
Yeah, especially bring out your drift cats.
Yes.
All right?
Yes. Please, and thank you.
All right, guys. So that wraps it up. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and hope to see you guys at the show.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, just like a little tidbit point, for people who have never been to an event or are coming to the event and want to actually talk to the people about their cars, just talk to them. That is one thing I want to add, because I know we were saying about...
It's about the story.
It's about the story. And a lot of these people and a lot of these girls are 100% willing to actually talk to you about what's put them where they are. So yeah, and even if you come to our drifting events, just ask for a ride along, because all of the girls are willing to take pretty much anyone for a ride along.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, as long as they're smiling, right? Yeah. And don't have a resting bee face.
I mean, you never know. There's the one person that gets sick in the passenger seat too. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes my wife has a look on her face, and it's just like, I gotta, you gotta think
Ease
hard.
off.
Yeah,
Ease
ease
off a
off,
bit,
right?
yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm just, all jokes aside. Yeah, just come up, say hi, ask. Everyone will be nice, and no one bites.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.